My identical twin brother was my best friend and closest confidant. We shared everything and had that mysterious twin connection people talk about. When friends started referencing conversations with me that I couldn't remember, I thought I was losing my mind. The truth. He had been systematically stealing my identity for 15 years, impersonating me to steal my relationships, my wife's love, and my entire life. My name is Daniel, and I'm about to tell you how I discovered that my identical twin brother had been systematically stealing pieces of my life for 15 years, how I finally got my revenge in the most unexpected way possible. Most people think having an identical twin is a blessing. Growing up, Jake and I were inseparable. We looked exactly alike, finished each other's sentences, and had that mysterious twin connection people always talk about. We were born just 12 minutes apart. I came first, something Jake never let me forget he resented. 12 minutes, he'd say, whenever we argued as kids. 12 minutes, and you think you're better than me? I never thought I was better than Jake. If anything, I always felt like I was living in his shadow. He was the charming one, the risk-taker, the twin who could walk into any room and own it within minutes. I was more cautious, more studious, more ... forgettable. Teachers constantly mixed us up. But somehow they always remembered Jake's name first. We went to different colleges, Jake to USC to study communications. Me to Stanford for computer science. For the first time in our lives, we were developing separate identities, separate friend groups, separate futures. I thought it was healthy. I was wrong. After graduation, we both ended up in San Francisco. I got a job at a tech startup. That eventually got acquired by Google, and Jake bounced between various marketing jobs, never quite finding his footing. On paper, my career was more successful, but Jake always seemed happier, more confident, more satisfied with his life. That should have been my first clue that something was wrong. The problem started when I met Emma at a coffee shop in the Mission District. She was a freelance graphic designer with flowing dark hair and the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen. We talked for 3 hours that first day, and I knew immediately that she was special. Emma was creative where I was analytical, spontaneous where I was careful. And somehow she made me feel like the most interesting person in the world. We dated for 6 months before I introduced her to Jake. I was nervous about it, twins dating. The same person is a cliché for a reason, and Jake had always been the more charming one. But Emma seemed completely smitten with me, and I figured I was being paranoid. The first meeting went perfectly. Jake was his usual charismatic self, but he seemed genuinely happy for us. Emma liked him, but in that casual way you like your boyfriend's family. There were no sparks, no lingering glances, no reason for concern. I proposed to Emma on the Golden Gate Bridge at sunset, and she said yes before I even finished asking the question. We were both crying and laughing, and it was the happiest moment of my life. When I called Jake to tell him the news, he sounded thrilled. "Danny, that's incredible," he said, using the childhood nickname only he was allowed to use. "Emma's perfect for you. I'm so happy you found someone who appreciates how amazing you are." Our wedding was everything Emma and I had dreamed of. Small and intimate, held in a vineyard in Napa Valley, with our closest friends and family. Jake was my best man, and his speech was perfect, funny, heartfelt, all about how lucky Emma was to have found me. But during the reception, something strange happened. I was talking to my college roommate when he made an odd comment. "I'm so glad you and Emma worked things out," he said. "When you told me about that rough patch a few months ago, I wasn't sure you guys would make it." I stared at him, confused. "What rough patch? We never had a rough patch." He looked equally confused. "You called me in February, remember? We're really upset about some fight you and Emma had. You said you thought she might break up with you. That conversation had never happened. Emma and I had never had a serious fight, and February had been one of our happiest months. But my roommate was absolutely certain it was me who had called him. I brushed it off as a misunderstanding. But over the next few months, similar incidents kept happening. Friends would reference conversations they'd had with me that I couldn't remember. Coworkers would mention things I'd supposedly told them about my relationship with Emma. My neighbor once thanked me for helping him move furniture on a day when I'd been out of town. The most unsettling incident happened at Emma's birthday party. Her best friend Sarah pulled me aside and said, "I'm so glad you took my advice about the surprise trip to Paris. Emma's been talking about it nonstop." I had never spoken to Sarah about Paris, and I had never planned a surprise trip. But when I casually asked Emma about it later, she lit up. "Oh my God, yes. When you suggested Paris for our anniversary, I almost cried. It was such a perfect romantic idea. I can't wait." I'd never suggested Paris, but somehow Emma believed I had. That night, I lay awake trying to make sense of what was happening. The only explanation that made sense was also the most impossible one. Somehow, Jake was impersonating me. But that was crazy, right? We were identical twins, but we lived separate lives. Jake had his own apartment, his own job, his own social circle, or so I thought. I decided to test my theory. The next day I told Emma I had to go to Los Angeles for work, a complete lie. Instead, I took a sick day and hired a private investigator. To follow Jake, I felt ridiculous doing it, but I needed to know what was going on. The PI's report shattered my world. Jake wasn't working at the marketing firm where he'd told me he was employed. In fact, he'd been fired from that job 8 months earlier. Instead, he was spending his days systematically inserting himself into my life. The photos were devastating. Jake having lunch with my coworkers, telling them he was me. Jake at my gym, using my membership. Jake at my regular coffee shop, chatting with the baristas who knew me by name. Most horrifying of all, Jake meeting with Emma's friends and family, pretending to be me. Building relationships with the people closest to my wife. The investigator had even recorded some conversations. In one, Jake was talking to Emma's mother about our marriage, sharing intimate details about our relationship that only I should know. In another, he was at my favorite restaurant, chatting with the owner who thought he was greeting a regular customer. But the worst revelation was yet to come. Jake had somehow gained access to my email and social media accounts. He'd been reading my private messages with Emma, learning about our plans and conversations, then using that information to insert himself into our story. When Emma thought I had suggested Paris, it was because Jake had sent her messages from my email account. I felt violated in a way I'd never experienced before. My own brother was literally stealing my identity, my relationships, my entire life. But why? What could he possibly gain from this elaborate deception? The answer came when I confronted him. I waited until evening and went to Jake's apartment unannounced. When he opened the door, I could see the guilt flash across his face, the same face I saw in the mirror every morning. "We need to talk," I said, pushing past him into his apartment. The evidence of his deception was everywhere once I knew what to look for. Photos of him with my friends and coworkers covered his refrigerator. A notebook filled with details about my life, Emma's favorite foods, my work schedule, inside jokes from my relationships, sat open on his kitchen table. He'd been studying me like I was a character he was preparing to play. "I can." "Explain," he started, but I cut him off. "Explain what, Jake? How you've been impersonating me for months? How you've been reading my private emails? How you've been lying to my wife and my friends and my coworkers?" He sat down heavily on his couch, and for a moment he looked genuinely devastated. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "You have everything, Danny. Everything I've ever wanted." "What are you talking about? We're identical twins. We have the same opportunities? The same no we don't?" He exploded, jumping up from the couch. "You're 12 minutes older, but somehow you got everything. The better grades, the better college, the better job, the perfect wife. Do you know what? It's like to watch your identical twin live the life you should have had." I stared at him, incredulous. The life I should have had, Jake. I worked for everything I have. I studied hard. I took risks. I put myself out there, and I didn't. His laugh was bitter. "Danny, we're genetically identical. We have the same intelligence, the same capabilities, the same potential. The only difference is luck. You got the breaks, I got the leftovers." "So your solution was to steal my identity?" Jake's expression changed, becoming calculating in a way that made my blood run cold. "Not steal it, Danny. Share it. We're identical twins. We should have identical lives. Emma fell in love with our face, our voice, our personality. She doesn't love you specifically. She loves what we are. What's the difference if I'm the one making her happy sometimes? The twisted logic of his reasoning horrified me. The difference is that she's my wife, Jake. She married me, not some collective twin entity. What you're doing is fraud. It's identity theft. It's evening the playing field, he interrupted. For 28 years, you've gotten the better half of everything we should have shared equally, just taking what should have been mine from the beginning. That's when I realized that Jake hadn't just been impersonating me recently. He'd been doing it our entire lives, in small ways that I'd never noticed. All those times teachers remembered his name first. All those times he seemed more confident and charming, he'd been practicing being me, studying how to be the better version of our shared identity. How long, Jake? How long have you been doing this? He looked me straight in the eye and I saw no remorse, only cold calculation. Since we were kids, Danny, every time you've got something I wanted, I figured out how to get it too. Your first girlfriend in high school? I took her on 3 dates pretending to be you before she figured it out. Your college girlfriend? I slept with her during spring break sophomore year. She never knew it wasn't you. The room was spinning. My entire life had been contaminated by Jake's deception. How many of my relationships had been built on lies? How many of my achievements had been shadowed by his interference? Emma, I whispered, barely able to form the words. Have you, ... with Emma? Jake's smile was the cruelest thing I'd ever seen. Not yet, Danny, but she's been so happy with our marriage lately. All those romantic gestures she thinks you've been making? All those deep conversations she thinks you've been having with her friends and family? She's falling in love with us all over again. I wanted to hit him, but violence wouldn't solve. Jake had systematically poisoned my entire life, but I was going to destroy his methodically and completely. You're sick, Jake. You need help. What I need, he said, standing up, is for you to accept that we're going to share this life, whether you like it or not. Emma will never know the difference, and frankly, she'll be getting the best of both of us. You can keep your job and your money, but the personal relationships, those belong to both of us now. That night, I went home and pretended everything was normal. I kissed Emma hello, asked about her day, and made dinner while my mind raced with plans. Jake thought he was so clever, but he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. Over the next week, I quietly gathered evidence of Jake's deception, changed all my passwords, and set up security cameras around my apartment. I documented every instance of his impersonation with timestamps and photos. Most importantly, I set a trap. I created a fake email account and sent myself a message about a fictional job opportunity in New York, making sure to include specific details about salary and start date. Then I waited. 3 days later, Emma brought up the New York job. Honey, I know we haven't talked about this yet, but I've been thinking about your job offers, she said over dinner. New York could be amazing for both of our careers. When do you have to give them an answer? I had never told Emma about any job offer because there wasn't one. The only way she could know about it was if Jake had read my fake email and told her about it, pretending to be me. Actually, Emma, I need to tell you something important, I said, setting down my fork. And I need you to trust me, even though what I'm about to say is going to sound impossible. I told her everything. About Jake's impersonation, about the private investigator, about the years of deception. I showed her the evidence, the photos, the recorded conversations. I watched her face go through the same progression of confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally rage that I'd experienced. You're telling me that some of my conversations with you weren't actually with you? She asked, her voice shaking. I don't know how many, but yes. Emma, I am so sorry. I had no idea he was doing this until recently. She was quiet for a long time, processing what I'd told her. Finally, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. The Paris trip, she said quietly. You never suggested the Paris trip, did you? Shook my head. The conversation with Sarah about our relationship. The phone call with my mom last week where you seemed to know things about my childhood that I'd never told you. The time you ran into my college roommate at the grocery store and knew her name even though I'd never introduced you. Each realization was like a knife in my chest. Jake hadn't just been impersonating me. He'd been building a relationship with my wife based on lies and stolen intimacy. Emma, I'm going to fix this, I promised. I'm going to make sure he never hurts us again. But Emma was already formulating her own plan. No, Daniel, we're going to fix this together. And Jake is going to regret the day he decided to mess with our marriage. What happened next was the most satisfying revenge I've ever been part of. Emma and I worked together to create an elaborate trap for Jake, using his own methods against him. First, we set up a fake emergency. Emma called Jake, pretending. She thought she was calling me, and told him she was in the hospital after a car accident. She begged him to come immediately, playing up her injuries and her fear. Jake, thinking he was rushing to comfort my distraught wife, arrived at the hospital within 30 minutes. What he found instead was me, Emma, 2 police officers, and a lawyer waiting for him in a conference room. "Hello, Jake," I said as he walked in, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally trapped panic. "Daniel, what's going on?" Emma said. "Emma said exactly what we planned for her to say," I interrupted. "Just like you've been saying exactly what you planned to say while pretending to be me for the past year." The lawyer laid out Jake's legal situation with brutal efficiency. Identity theft, fraud, stalking, harassment, invasion of privacy, the list of potential charges was extensive. The evidence we'd gathered was overwhelming. And Jake's own apartment full of stolen personal information was proof of his systematic deception. "Mr. Morrison," the lawyer said, "you're facing potential federal charges that could result in significant prison time. However, my clients are prepared to offer you an alternative." Emma leaned forward, her voice cold and controlled. "You're going to disappear from our lives completely. Jake, you're going to move to a different city, change your phone number, and never contact Daniel or me again. You're going to get the psychological help you obviously need. And you're going to do all of this voluntarily, or we're going to prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law." Jake looked from Emma to me, clearly calculating whether he could talk his way out of this. "Danny, come on, we're brothers. We're twins." "This is just a misunderstanding now, Jake," I said firmly. "This is the end of your access to my life. You have 2 choices. Disappear voluntarily, or disappear involuntarily after you get out of prison. What's it going to be?" The defeat in Jake's eyes was complete and absolute. He'd spent years believing he was smarter than everyone else, more deserving of my life than I was. Now he was faced with the reality that his elaborate deception had led to total ruin. "I'll leave," he said quietly. "But Danny, you have to understand. I understand perfectly," I cut him off. "You're a narcissist who couldn't accept that identical DNA doesn't guarantee identical outcomes. You're my brother, and I'll always love you, but I never want to." "See you again?" Jake moved to Portland 2 weeks later. He didn't tell me he was leaving Emma and I. Found out through the private investigator we'd kept on retainer to monitor his compliance with our agreement. He found a job at a small marketing firm, got an apartment under his own name. As far as we know, started living his own life for the first time in decades. But the story doesn't end there. The most unexpected twist came 6 months later, when I got a call from a woman named Jessica in Portland. "Is this Daniel Morrison?" she asked. "Yes. Who's this?" "My name is Jessica Chen. I've been dating your brother Jake for 3 months, and I think you need to know that he's been pretending to be you." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" He told me his name was Daniel Morrison, and that he worked in tech in San Francisco, but was temporarily relocated to Portland. "He's been using your photos on dating apps, your career achievements, even details about your marriage. When I reverse searched one of his photos, I found your LinkedIn profile and realized he'd been lying about everything." Jake hadn't learned his lesson at all. He'd simply moved his identity theft operation to a new city and started over. This time I didn't hesitate. I called the Portland Police Department and filed a report for identity theft and fraud. I sent them all the evidence Emma and I had gathered, plus Jessica's testimony about Jake's continued deception. Jake was arrested 3 days later because he was now operating across state lines and had violated the terms of our informal agreement. Federal charges were filed. He was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for identity theft, wire fraud, and stalking. The judge's comments during sentencing were particularly satisfying, Mr. Morrison. You've systematically violated your brother's privacy and identity for years, showing a complete disregard for both the law and basic human decency. Your obsession with living someone else's life has now cost you the opportunity to live your own life freely. Jake was released from prison 8 months ago. He's living in Chicago now, working at a call center, and is required to check in with a probation officer monthly. He's also prohibited from using social media or dating apps. And any contact with me or Emma would be a violation of his parole. Emma and I are stronger than ever. The experience of Jake's deception was traumatic, but working together to stop him brought us closer in ways I never expected. We know each other more deeply now, having shared the experience of being violated and then fighting back together. We never did take that trip to Paris. The suggestion had been contaminated by Jake's manipulation. Instead, Emma planned a surprise trip to Japan for our second anniversary, somewhere Jake had never been and couldn't poison with false memories. Last month, Emma told me she was pregnant. We're having twins, boys, according to the ultrasound. When she told me the news, we both laughed until we cried. Promise me we'll raise them to be individuals, she said, holding the ultrasound photo. Promise me they'll never think they need to steal someone else's life to be happy? I promise, I told her, meaning every word. The irony isn't lost on me that Jake's obsession with sharing my life ultimately gave me a deeper appreciation for the life that was truly mine. His deception forced me to examine every relationship, every achievement, every moment of happiness, to determine what was real and what was contaminated by his lies. What I discovered was that the life I'd built was genuinely mine. My marriage to Emma, my career success, my friendships, they were all based on who I really was, not on Jake's manipulations. He'd been a parasite feeding off my life, but he'd never been able to truly replace me. Today, people ask me what it's like to have an identical twin. I tell them the truth. Genetics might make us look the same, but character makes us completely different people. Jake and I shared DNA, but we never shared values, integrity, or respect for other people's lives. The brother who tried to steal my identity ultimately helped me understand my own identity more clearly than I ever had before. And for that twisted gift, I suppose I should thank him. But I won't, because I never want to see him again.